Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation, Unlocking the Potential of Teaching Games for Understanding model, developing the whole child. Before we going into our presentation, let me quickly introduce our research team. Dr. Linda Griffin, Tse Sheng, Bruce Neer, Nkala, and Korey and Kanae Haneishi. So we've been working on this topic about 2 years. So I'm going to pass this to Dr. Linda Griffin about the game appreciation. So the importance of the game's appreciation in the original TGfU model. So Linda, can you briefly explain what this game appreciation portion of the TGfU model means?
Yes, thank you, Kanae. So I have spent a long time thinking about this original model, and certainly it was the springboard for a lot of work that I've done with Judy Oslin, Steve Mitchell, and Joy Butler for that matter. And so I've always pondered the idea of appreciation, and that we don't think about it enough. We think about the game, the learner, the questions, the way we arrange games, how we assess a game, how we work at tactile awareness and skill execution, but we haven't really thought about appreciation much. So appreciation in the original model was how the game is played, the rules of the game or game form, the rituals and traditions of a game, and the etiquette of the game. So all about the game, great. But then there's like, what about the learner in appreciation? So I have been thinking about, we've been talking about the idea of expanding game appreciation to include game and learner appreciation, and build around it the idea of having students think about their self-management, self-responsibility, responsibility and decision-making, their self-awareness, problem solving, the social awareness around what a game, since games are social, and the relationship that skills that you have to have a game work, to have a good game. So we've been pondering that for years, for the last couple of years, around expanding this idea to include learner appreciation.
Thank you, Linda. So I'm gonna open up this to a little bit more conversation. So let me start with Korey. So can you briefly talk about a little bit more what you were thinking and what we are thinking about how we want to expand this part of the game appreciation or learner appreciation part of it?
Yeah, so one way that we've been thinking about it is not looking at it as just an individual part, but also looking at how intentional planning and how the whole kind of comes together as a full part to help students learn. I think something that we've been missing within physical education, especially in some models-based instruction, is the intentional planning for the affective domain. And so based off what Linda just mentioned, this really sets up a bridge and sets up a conduit for us to be intentional about how we can plan for the affective learning outcomes, but more importantly, how we can make the affective outcomes more practical than they once have been. A lot of times it's very difficult to teach, especially initial licensure students and in-service teachers, how to plan for affective outcomes. And this model and this even way of thinking allows us to start building that bridge between the cognitive and the psychomotor, and really building a true bridge to the affective, which once we get to the affective domain, we can really open up learning in ways that we haven't really explored in game-based instruction or just in physical education in general.
Yeah, like, you know, like in recent years in physical education, like we've been hearing that, okay, it's very important to teach or include equity, inclusion, diversity, and justice. And we hear that, we've been hearing it, but there are not much resources for the practitioner to actually learn how to do it. So like practical examples, or like how to actually implement that idea into their lessons. So I think that was the challenges that we saw it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, may I just add something, Kanae?
Yeah.
I think educators generally would agree that what you mentioned, inclusion, diversity, and all that, they are really that important. But when we look at our lessons, right, we are not being deliberate and intentional. Right? By putting students together to play against each other, they will not naturally learn about inclusion, for example. By putting two students together, they will not magically know how to collaborate and how to communicate with one another in a respectful manner. So like what Korey mentioned many times about the intentionality. That's why Linda early on mentioned about the importance of let's relook at it, the model again. The original model has the appreciation part, but are we too focused on teaching our students how to play the game and neglected the more important skills of say the social justice part and then the democracy part as well. So that's why we are looking at reframing it. It is still important, but as the world becomes more complex, Jedi becomes more and more important. We need to start looking at games education beyond just learning to play the game, because there are so many opportunities that comes with playing games where students will disagree, students will have an argument, for example, and those are golden opportunities for us to step in, to address it, to ask questions, to nudge them, to think further, and to talk about it. It is so important, right? So I think that over the past 2 years, we've been talking about this, right? And that is what we want to go into, to possibly let more people, more educators think about this, to reframe and to focus a little bit more on what you mentioned just now, the Jedi in games education.
Just to build on that, Teng, is more, from my standpoint, or I think from our standpoint as a group, when we talked about intentionality, we were looking at it in terms of a frame of physical education is the one place where children, you don't select, so you're not removed from physical education because you can't run, jump, or skip. In most physical education programs, you might find that there's a very diverse classroom that has people from diverse backgrounds, but also race, nationality, gender is also diverse in that particular group. So those are great opportunities to get a lot of aha moments. But moving away from the aha moment and then saying, well, we've got this wonderful foundation. How do we intentionally do that? How do we intentionally design it and take advantage of those the diverse population that we have in PE is what I think our goal was right at the beginning, to try and tap into that and then design it and lean into use games-based approach models as a backdrop to that, because in games-based approach, by modifying the game, by changing the pedagogical principles, you can modify the game to teach a specific objective. So taking that lens and using it and saying, how can we extend that lens to us Jedi is what our goal has really been.
Yeah, so like we really think that game learning is a great opportunity to address those social issues. If you see in the game situation is almost like that small reflection of what's going on in the society. There's a power differences coming up. Skilled players and not skilled popularity is there. Gender comes in. So we see so much going. We see a lot what we see in society. We see in a small version in the game. So let's talk about something about the challenges that we've been facing that the past 2 years that when we are doing work. So for example, in order to address the inclusion, we were talking about changing the rules, saying, for example, everyone needs to touch the ball before take a shot or goal. And then there were some debates on that too,
Yeah, I remember that conversation, and I'm gonna tee Linda up for this one because we had that conversation quite a bit. I think that the prefix of that conversation, the foundation of that conversation was, in the actual game, there is no rule that says everyone should touch the ball before doing it. And in exaggerating it, do we change the game, the authenticity of the game itself? And we had a wonderful debate about that. I really enjoyed that debate.
Yeah, I mean, you asked the, we asked the questions. So if you're arranging the rules, so X has to touch the ball, we don't want to get into a gender battle. So it's a girl has to touch the ball, and how do you deal with that and make a rule so that there is some sense to how do you include people into the game? How do you make sure all players are feeling that they're involved? Because the broader notion of involvement needs to be here. Lots of times physical education teachers, they want students to get involved. Yes, performance matters to some level, but involvement, and that was our key to our dilemma as we were having these pretty intense discussions in a very, I don't know,
Yeah, and
collegial
in terms of rules, when we presented the rule at one of the conference, one of the questions we got was, if you make that rule like that, maybe other teams is kind of defending one of the really weaker student, so that that other team is gonna never have an opportunity to even score or something like that.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
I just want to remind everyone, we have been working on this draft, right? Which I want to show, put it out on the slide. Can you all see it? Yeah. This is something that I think we've been working on because when we talk about reframing, we want to make it a little bit more intentional. So I think this is still work in progress. Definitely still lots of work to be done. But what we're trying to say is that after the game, rather than jumping into the appreciation in our original model, possibly that needs to be a intentional process where we get students to talk about, by asking them questions, what happened just now, right? For example, if there are some arguments that happens in a game, some disagreement, someone is not passing to someone in the game, for example, to get them to be aware of that ethical issues or Jedi issues that surface in the game, and then leads to the original decision making and performance, which is in the original model. And then after that, coming to the conclusion part, and it is where the appreciation part comes in for our reframing, is to link what they learn to their everyday life, which is so important to make it relevant for them to understand why, for example, inclusion is not just important in games, but in their life as well. And if you can see in this frame that we have, the draft framework that we have, intentionality is right up there. Again, if we agree that it is important, we cannot let the learning happen by chance. It must happen by design. And if it is by design, then we need to be intentional. And you'll be wondering, what is that triangle in the center, the B stands for? We all agree, if you want to deliver a good game-based approach lesson that also address the ethical and Jedi and the social part, of the learning, the teacher first have to believe that it's important, right? I think we'll be naive to believe that, everyone will focus on that, because we all have different belief on what games education is about, right? Some of us would, with the limited time, we want to make sure that there is high activity and students learn the game. Because if you want the students to talk about inclusion, for example, you need time for the conversation, right? You need time to make the link to everyday life, for example, and something got to give, right? So you need to start from you, the educator itself, that you have to believe that it is important. It is important to not just teach them to play games, but also to teach them to be a better person, right? Any thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I think it's just to add, is just focusing on the process part, so you provide opportunity for students to think those kind of things during the game learning. So that process is very important that what we are looking for, taking a time for and then giving an opportunity to discuss things, and then like why is it important, why is not important, what's fair, what's inclusion, that kind of conversations that embedded into the game learning, that the process itself is really important, the focusing on that part.
Yeah, in addition to that process, more importantly, we're also offering context for the learning to happen. And I think a lot of times when we are intentional, we are trying to set up learning situations, oftentimes we're not teaching in the right or proper context and or setting up context in general to help students construct their own knowledge, right? When we think about good learning is happens from the learner, right? The teacher can set up the constraints, they set up the planning. However, in between that, we also need to make sure the students can construct their own knowledge from what they had prior to their learning experience, but also we really need to make sure and hone in on the process, but also really focus on the context in which we're teaching in. And I think that really will help drive home the points that we're trying to make right now.
So we'll sign,
I'll say one thing to add on to Korey, and not be afraid to ask the students for the solutions, right? When they know, they're not afraid to talk about it. And we need to give them a safe space to do that. And games can provide that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Tien, go ahead.
No, Kanae, I think time is almost up. I think we can go on and on, but we have to stick to the 20 minutes.
Yeah, we may have maybe one quick topic to talk about. It's just bring up one more challenges we have faced throughout 2 years.
Yeah, I want to bring up this because it's really important to understand that this work is not comfortable work. This is DEI, Jedi work is never ever comfortable. It requires changes from people. And therefore, it not being comfortable makes other people uncomfortable. So two things are really, really important. Not everyone looks through the same lens of Jedi. So it's important that as teachers try to implement this, understanding that as you make your lesson plans, you sort of lean into the experience that you've had in life to be able to say, you know what, how could this be something that I could teach concepts of social justice or of just diversity and inclusion that I find I hold dear to me? Like, where can situations like that arise? For administrators, it's also really, really difficult to navigate these conversations because, as we noticed in our 2 years, we presented this at the height of critical race theory being something that was a debate within schools and embedded that in schools. So, and there was a polarized positions about where critical race theory should land within independent schools and within schools in general. So understanding the timing of this in terms of rolling it out is hard, but there is no right time. There's never really going to be a right time. So we've got to actually chip away at it slowly. So as you take on this work bravely, you have to understand that you might have to fight battles that are beyond just your teaching in class to the students, but also navigate conversations that are outside, because one of the children is going to bring up critical race theory in the classroom. How do you discuss and make your position known in that way?
Yeah, I also like to add a point where it is not easy for the teacher to teach, to facilitate, right, the conversation, because there's no template, right? There's no right or there's no wrong, because everyone looks at the issue with their lens, right? So I think that's where the challenge is, and that's where the importance of that belief, because if you don't have a strong belief that this is important, you'll give up, because it is not easy to ask the right question and to facilitate the discussion. And sometimes you may not have the answer, and that's where the conversation is very rich, right? Isn't it? Right, to talk about it. I think that's what's important. Let's talk about it, right? And address any misconception or any stereotypes we may have. Right? So that's the challenge. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So we would love to continue our conversation, but time is kind of limited for us too. So for those of you who are interested in looking at our work in more practical way, that we have wrote a chapter in this book, and it should be coming up soon. So you can find out more. Okay, how you can apply what we are talking about in the practical settings. And then we would love to hear from you, that if you have any questions or thoughts or comments, we are happy to hear from you. And then these are our email address. And then please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions in that. Anybody else, folks, would like to add something?
No, thank you for listening.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you again for listening. And then we look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.